Hi folks, Rick here. Welcome to my channel. All right, so today I want to talk about starting a project and hopefully how to do one successfully. Now, I'm not an expert at this. I haven't done a ton of them, but what I have done, this has been something I've been wanting to do for 20, 30 years, and over that time frame, I've been doing a lot of research, making sure when the time comes that I'm set, ready to go, and I have a good game plan. So I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way that I think that's going to help you be successful in your project. So let me go ahead and get started here. The first thing we really need to do, when it comes to a project, seems pretty easy there, but what kind of type project that there is. A project could be anything. And so it could be like a vintage car, like I got a 66 Mustang I'm working on, but it could be like a Jeep, a boat or a quad or something like that. So that's the one type of thing here. And I'm going to kind of introduce you to this piece of artwork here, which is just a scale. And the scale is strictly for visualization purposes. There's no specific points on here. I just want to kind of go from right to left, or whatever way this way is here, probably left to right on this particular, the way you guys are looking at here. But so don't get hung up on wherever I put marks on here. Just kind of visualize this scale, and we'll kind of walk through this. I'm going to kind of explain this to you, then I'm going to circle back with some examples. So obviously, if we first got to define what our project is going to be. So like on my car, we'll just use my example there. It's going to be more of a vintage car. And so the first thing we want to do here is kind of think of our project and put our project on the scale right here. So if I think of a vintage car, one of the things here is you've got stuff over here, which is going to be, some old rusted out thing with a tree growing through the windshield, and over here it's going to be a full-on resto mod, right? And so I'm not doing a restore, I'm going to do more of a resto mod. So that would represent this scale from over here, the tree through the windshield, here full custom. So with that scale here, there's a couple things we got to do. So now that I know the type of project are and what this kind of scale represents, there's a couple things here we got to think about here. So what is it that I want a project to be? That's the first thing, is I got to put on this thing, right? Where here do I want to put on the scale? Do I want to build a project that's going to be clear over here? A full-on resto mod somewhere in the middle? Do I just want to get it off here at the bottom? Where on the scale do I want to put my project? So for me, I'm just going to start off putting a mark here. My project here, I want to build kind of a bulletproof daily driver is what I want to do. I don't want a show car. I want it to be nice. I want it to be fun to drive. And I want to be able to drive it in traffic and take it on trips and everything else there. So I'm going to kind of stick my endpoint here, which this is where I want to go. Hopefully you can see this, is right here. This is the endpoint. The next piece here we got to decide is our buy-in spot. This is where we're going to purchase the car. So we're going to purchase this one laying out in the field. Maybe yes, maybe no. Do we want to do something here more in the middle? So for me, I wanted something that was rust-free, and I wanted something that was at least running and driving. Didn't have to run and drive good, but I wanted it to run and drive. So that was kind of the buy-in point that I selected here. So I'm going to kind of put that right about this mark right here. So that was my buy-in point. The trick to this whole thing, and we're going to spend a lot of time on, is the gap between the buy-in and our endpoint. This is your project gap, or your build gap. This here represents the time, the effort, and all the things you got to do to get your project from where you bought it to where you want to end up on here. And so that's one part of this scale here, is we want to identify here what our ending goal is, where our buy-in point is going to be, which is, takes a lot of work to do, and then really identify our build gap right here. The other thing as we look at this thing is if we convert this scale to a money scale. It's another important thing to think about this thing. So obviously here, this would be low money, this would be a ton of money. So if we think of our project here, the old car resting out in the weeds, that's obviously going to be pretty cheap. Something full on out here that you're going to buy is going to be extraordinarily expensive. The money scale is going to be determined obviously on the type of project. Is this something like an old 2003 Saturn? Is it a 67 Firebird? What is it? So that's why there's no data points. There's really no reference on here, and this is strictly just for visualization on this thing. So on mine here, obviously, I want something here on a vintage car. It's going to be a fairly amount of money here, and I'm going to buy in up here. So not anywhere down in this area. I'm going to kind of buy here toward the middle. So that's going to be a little bit more money up front. So it's kind of important here where you set these. This is going to determine where your budget sets, and I'll talk about more on that when it comes up here. I guess one thing I just do want to point out here also is the distance between these two, and again, this is just visualization. The distance between these two is going to be the cost it's going to take you to build your car, right? So you got your purchase price, but then all the things in between here is stuff that you got to buy in order to get it fixed up. So keep that in mind. We're going to focus on this here in a little bit. Obviously, the wider this is, the more build cost that there is here. A couple other things I want to put on here. I'm going to kind of work through the scale kind of fast, and I keep looking at my notes here. So we can also use this scale, same scale here for time and effort. And so we'll focus our time and effort here on this build gap. The wider this gap is here, the more time it's likely going to take you to complete it. So if you buy it here, it's going to take you a certain amount of time. If you buy something back here, it's going to take you obviously a lot longer time to get up here. A lot more work, a lot more effort, and a lot more time. So that's a very important thing here is this build gap here to determine your time and amount of effort that it's going to take. We can also use this thing here. I'm going to kind of combine this one here to skills, tools, and space. And we're going to focus here on this build gap right here. So by and large, the wider this gap is right here, the more skills it's going to take you to complete your project, right? So we're not talking about easy stuff. You're talking about a lot more stuff. You could be talking about frame repair, replacing body panels, engine overhauls, and stuff like that. So the wider this gap, likely the more skills you're going to need in order to complete it. It's also going to take, possibly specialized tools. So the wider this gap is, the chances are that you're going to need some more specialized tools, maybe like a welder, some hoists, some jacks, various things like that. So keep that in mind. And something I don't want to overlook is also the space. The wider this gap is as well, typically the more space you're going to need. So if you got an easy project with a small gap, you can basically roll your car in. If you got a big shop, it's not a big deal. But if you're tight on space like I am, where you're working on your garage, if you've got a one-car garage, you can pull it in there and do some work to it. But let's say here you got a little bit wider gap and you want to do an engine overhaul or something like that. To pull that engine out and then have a spot to work on, now you're talking almost 2 bays of a garage that you're going to have, right? So that space becomes important if you don't have room enough for 2 cars. What happens if you're going to do a frame-off restoration or something like that? That could be 3 cars or bays or more. So you got to think about that space. If you're constrained on space, the wider this gap, the more space it's going to take you. So keep that in mind. That's a big issue with me, is I run out of space on stuff like that. So now that we kind of got some visualization, let's talk about some issues here that come up here. And so one I'm going to do here is work on the cost. Again, on my point here, what do I want in a project here? So it's very important to determine this end goal. This is going to set really here the total cost of your project. Does that fit within your budget realistically? Do I want this? Maybe I should kind of make it go this way a little bit so it's not so darn expensive. You really got to determine what this is, what it is you want for a project, and then where you're going to buy in at. Now in my example here, I've got a vintage car that's rust-free and it's running and driving, right? So I put my dot here, my line here. That's not a cheap dot. A rust-free car from the 60s is difficult to find, and one that's running and driving isn't cheap. So you might look at this and say, I'm not paying that kind of money. That's a lot of money. And for my dollars, it is. This is a ton of money right here to buy in at that point. So why wouldn't I buy in down here where it's cheaper? Well, you can do that. And there's no right or wrong answer in here. The trick to this thing here is understanding what the consequences are of these decisions and make sure you're fine with them. The problem is, what people get into quite often here is I'm not going to pay this money. It's too much. I'm going to go down here. And this is fine. If you buy something way down on this side of the scale and you work, you do all the work yourself, you do a good job going to swap meets and that kind of stuff, the purchase price plus the build cost, which is a long line here now, if I'm back over here, hopefully the two of those combined is cheaper than this here. But the reality is, in a lot of instances, and it happens quite often here, if I back right here, this gap here, the money you save on the purchase price is oftentimes way offset by the amount of additional costs on that build gap right there. These parts are outrageously expensive. It's shockingly how much stuff costs these days. So there's not a right answer on here, but you just really got to do your research on this thing. And this is the key to the whole thing. Research, research, research. You want to make sure that you're comfortable on where you're buying in, and then do a darn good job at estimating this build cost right here, because it can be a lot. So just because your initial price back here, oh, I'm saving a lot of money, I bought it for half the cost. It could be triple the cost for that build cost. So keep that in mind. You can go out there on Marketplace and Craigslist and all that stuff and see car after car after car where I'm just ran out of money, I'm selling it. Partial projects. There's partial projects out there right and left, and that's from people that may have bought in down here and for money reasons didn't realize how much it was going to cost to get them up here. So watch out for that one there. Really understand this gap. This gap right here is really the critical point on this thing, and whether or not you're going to succeed or fail on this thing. The next example I want to do on here is versus the time and effort scale. So again, the wider this gap, the more time and effort. So some people want to buy in down here, and that's okay. So if you're going to do a family project where you're going to buy some old piece of junk out here, then go out on the weekends every now and then, you work on it, and you do this for a couple of years, 2-3 years or something like that, that's perfectly fine. That's a lot of fun. It's no problem buying down here. This is what you do. This is where the fun part is, and you do that. For myself and a lot of people though, what can happen as you get back here is it gets to be so much time and so much effort, it turns into work. If it turns into work, it's no longer a fun project, and then out comes the tarp and it goes over. It's very easy to get back in here, in thinking on some of this stuff. Oh, I can do that pretty easy, pretty quick. Then you realize how tough it is, or even finding parts or getting parts or what have you like that. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed with the amount of work and the effort that's in it. You're tired of going out every single weekend or walking past the thing and it's in 100 pieces all the time. It can get very easy to get frustrated here if you're not 100% comfortable on this build gap here. So pay attention to this thing here. If you're buying back here, the wider the gap here is, again, the more risk it is to get, disinterested in that project there. Again, it's not a bad thing. I don't want to say close this gap up. I just say do your research, make sure you understand what this gap represents, and make sure you're comfortable. A lot of people want to buy right here, and they'll bring it clear up to here. That's what the whole purpose of this project is, to get out there and enjoy working, and this is where the enjoyment is. They buy this thing, they build it all the way clear out to darn near the end, then they sell it and start over again. That's perfect. That's absolutely the right way to do it if that's what you want. If you're like me though and you're not interested in that, I'm kind of interested in actually getting a project car and driving it as well as doing some of the work. This big a gap for me just isn't right. So I chose to get up here. So again, research this gap for time, not just the cost, but the time and effort. The other piece here is going to be, skills, tools, and space on this thing related to this gap. Obviously, the wider the gap, the more tools, skills, and space. You watch a lot of these TV shows. I like watching them, and they're doing this and they're doing that. If you look closely, most all of them have brand spanking new parts, and most of that stuff's been given to them, which is just fine. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way, but I'm starting with the project car I bought back here. Well, the first thing I do is I buy a brand spanking new frame. Never been touched, all the bolt holes are there, everything's working, it's not bent, not this, not rusted. Then bolt all pre-engineered parts to it, right? You just bolt brand new bolts, brand new this, all that kind of stuff. That makes it look really easy. That's not reality for the most of us. If it is, great. But the most of us, we're buying some old rusted out thing back over here and we're placing, new used stuff on there, stuff we're finding at swap meets, and, bolts are snapping off, we're missing bolts. We don't even know if there are supposed to be bolts in there because, it's so rusted over. That's the reality of this stuff here. And so what happens is all this stuff that looks really easy isn't. One, it takes a lot of specialized skills to do some of this stuff. You may have them, you may not. It's not as easy as it looks on TV or the internet on stuff like that. Also, the tools you need for this stuff right there. A lot of it requires specialized tools that they don't show you, and you may not have it, and then that creates a lot of struggle. And obviously, this takes a lot of space as well here. And so you see a lot of these things on here, again, on Marketplace and Craigslist and those type of places out there where have a project car, bought all new floor pans and a quarter panel, brand new in the box, just needs to be put on. This is an example of somebody went out there that bought all this stuff and then it's gone out there and realized, holy cow, this is a lot more involved than what I thought it was. I don't have the skills, or I'm not comfortable, or I'm just flat overwhelmed on the amount of work that it's going to take. So again, your skills, tools, and space, make sure you really research this area. All right, so now that we've kind of got this scale hopefully embedded in your brain, because that's the whole purpose of this thing, is just to kind of visualize this one. Let's get some examples here of some things we can do here to make these things more successful. So one, obviously, is do your research. That's the key, especially this gap right here. Research, research, research. And I'm going to give you some examples of this thing. One thing I would do to start off with is when you've kind of got an idea what your project is, go out and look at cars that, or whatever your project is, go out and look at stuff at shows or whatever and see examples of what that is. Just look at them. Hey, I'll tell you, for years and years, the big old 50s, 60s style Cadillac is convertible has been my project. That is what I want. I love that car. I still love that car. But that's what it's always been in my head. When I started going out to some car shows and really getting serious about maybe pulling the trigger these last few years, I've been out looking at this stuff and I realized, man, that's probably not really what I want. They're complex. There's a lot of sheet metal, a lot of chrome, a lot of stuff you got to find, a lot of expense and complexity. And I'm looking at some of this stuff, and this is just me in my example here. But the more and more and more I looked at those cars, the more and more I realized that's probably not, this whole mess right here with the scale is probably not the right fit for me. And so I've changed. I changed on that. That's not really what that I ended up doing. So I went up and actually changed my thing now to where I'm just looking for really any car there, a vintage car that's got rust free and is ready to go. So it's something there. By going out and doing all that research, I really decided changed my project to start with. And then also, when I was out there looking at, is I was, you're kind of always looking, here's my project car way over here. Well, I'm starting looking at some of that, start looking at the costs and everything else. I'm realizing that's not really realistic anymore. It's really starting to come back maybe closer to this way. And I'll give you some more examples here in a minute here. But go out and do some research. Look at a lot of cars that fit this line right here to make sure this is what you end up wanting. For me, it changed. The second thing it changed is while you're out there looking, is look at examples of cars that meet where you're thinking your buy-in's going to be. So I was thinking my buy-in was going to be down here, to be honest with you. That's kind of what I was looking at. The more and more I looked at, here's the effort that it's going to take to get this. This one went this way a little bit. And then this build gap is like, holy cow, if I buy something way back here, I got to do this, that, and the other thing. It's like, is that really what I want to do? The project's supposed to be fun, and I like working on these things. That's part of the fun. Some stuff's fun, some stuff's not. So a lot of the stuff down here I was finding, I'm really not interested in doing this stuff, and so I better make my buy-in spot a little bit higher and then make my gap smaller. That's what worked out for me. But it wasn't until I was really going out there and researching all this stuff and seeing physically with my eyes that all this stuff started to sink in. So do your research, go out and look at this thing. Along with this, be realistic where this gap is and where your buy-in point is. This gap has to be within your budget, for one. Again, I started over here, quickly went this way quite a bit. I started out, again, with this Cadillac convertible, that went away. My goal now, I've recently just purchased a 66 Mustang. My goal wasn't a 66 Mustang. My goal was a vintage car, a car that was rust-free and was running and driving. I could not specify which car because none of those cars that I really wanted or I had in my head was going to fit this spot right here within my budget. So what I had to do is really open up a net in order to find something that I could get here and successfully get here on a vintage car. I had to be pretty open to the type of car. So I cast a wide net. I just got to find something. Hopefully it looks cool, and hopefully, you know, it might be some stuff I didn't like, but I'm pretty wide net. I didn't know whether it was a Ford, Chevy, Pontiac, or whatever. It didn't really matter if it was a vintage car, and you know, I could take it up to this level right here. Also, I wanted to make sure my buy-in was correct here, and so I just went out and tried to find a car, and I ended up finding this car, which was a 66 Mustang, which I'm thankful for, as I like that car. I also had to look at that car and say, well, I needed to find one here also on my build cost, right? I had to find one here that I thought was going to be here. It needed to be running and driving and rust-free. What car fit that thing? There's a lot of stuff down in here, a lot of options down here. That's not where I wanted. I wanted to be up here. So there wasn't very many choices. So again, my project was very limited. I just needed to find something that was relatively cool that fit this bill. And that was completely different than what's been in my head for a lot of times. You really got to be realistic. When you really start looking at those cars, see what it takes, see what the prices of stuff are, not only to purchase the price, but that build gap right here. When you start looking at this stuff, you got to be realistic. Make sure that it fits your budget. Make sure it fits your time, skills, and everything else like that. Because what I found is all this stuff is completely different than when I started there. So pay close attention to this one. The other thing here is scope creep. And scope creep is once you've written down your project. Here's my project right here. I wrote down exactly what it is. This is a vintage car, which is now morphed into a 66 Mustang, rust-proof. I want it to be a bulletproof daily driver, not a show car. I want it to look nice, want it to look cool, but it's not a show car. I want to go out there and drive it. I don't want to worry about getting a scratch on it or that kind of stuff. That is my goal, and that needs to be written down. It's very easy to get scope creep, which means to expand your project there. And so one of the things I'm going to do to make it bulletproof is rebuild the engine. If you're going to be rebuilding the engine, don't you want to add more horsepower? It's like, you know, if I'm going to put in a new crankshaft, it's the same money for a stroker crank. Why not do that? My car's got a 289 in it. Why not put a stroker crank in it? If you're putting stroker crank in there, might as well put new heads. Then you might as well go fuel injection, yada, yada, yada. Next thing you know, now you got a fortune in there. Well, a 289, you know, for street cars, torque is really king on the thing. And a 289 is a small engine. Why not pop a 351 in there and build that? Well, 351 stroker is also outrageously expensive, plus its complexity of the thing. Now with all this extra horsepower, I got a 7 3/4 rear end. That's not going to handle it. It's also got extremely tall gears, which is not what you want for a fun, high-performance street car. You want something like, it's got like 280 gears. You want like 350 or 373 gears. And I'm going to need a brand new 9-inch rear end to handle that horsepower. Well, I've got a 3-speed automatic transmission. I want to keep an automatic, but that's not going to handle the power. And with the 350 or 373 gear, it's going to be screaming going down the freeway. So now I got to get a fully built 4-speed automatic. Well, you start putting all that in here, and the budget has just exploded. None of that high performance stuff and all that rear end and upgraded transmission doesn't meet my goal. It's all extra nice to have stuff. There's nothing wrong with extra nice to have stuff there. If you can afford it and got the time and the budget allows, by all means go for that kind of stuff. I don't know where I'm sitting on that, but I can tell you none of it meets this goal. It's all extra nice to have, and the extra cost for that stuff is ballooning out so fast, slowly but surely, reality's coming in, and I'm very closely sticking to my line here. You got to, watch for scope creep, because that will completely blow your project out, and it's something here that I've been recently going through. The other thing on this thing is your project. The whole reason we're doing this to start with is to have fun. And so how can you get to the enjoyment part of your project the quicker and maximize the amount of fun you're going to have? Again, I mentioned some people, like on a family project, the fun piece is buying something here and doing all this work. That's the fun. So you buy your project, it's pretty simple. You go out and you have fun and you get going. For a lot of us, though, that want to enjoy the car and enjoy the experience of driving it as well as working on it, then it's kind of a 50-50 mix in here. And so if we buy something down here, it's going to be all just the build process and none of the enjoyment of the driving piece there. And so what can you do to maximize that thing? And so this really factored a lot on where my buy-in spot was here, is I wanted to get something running and driving. It didn't have to run and drive great, but I wanted to run and drive so I can sit there and enjoy it as much as I can and then pull it in and do projects. When you're going out and enjoy it, it gives you a chance to assess things and how to prioritize them. It also just jacks up your excitement and get ready to go in there and do an upgrade. So this is what dictated a lot, of course, where my buy-in is. I wanted something running and driving. Well, if you buy something down here, you can still do the same thing. You see a lot of those will it run shows, right? Where they buy something and then they just do whatever they can to get the thing started and driving around. There's a lot of benefit for that. So if you bought something down here and you're gonna, have to do a bunch of body work and you're gonna do, the old engine swap, engine and transmission swap. Well, one idea for you, something to think about here to make sure the fun factor is into your project as quickly as possible, is you might think about going and getting that engine and transmission from the junkyard, if that's what you're planning on doing, getting it sooner. Get the thing in there, just plop it in there as is, do the minimum amount it takes to get the thing started and running and driving. It doesn't matter whether, you can wear a helmet and goggles if you don't got a windshield, put some plywood on the floor or something else if you got holes in the darn thing, but do what it takes here to get that thing started and running. You imagine down here, you pile in half a dozen of your buddies in the back seat and try to make it to the lake and back on a weekend. How much fun would that be? Not only is it just a huge amount of fun, it'll give you a chance to assess the car and prioritize what you want to fix first, but it's also going to get you jazzed about going into like, holy cow, the front wheels are falling off on the darn thing or something. I want to go ahead and maybe prioritize fixing that first so I can continue my fun factor. So think about how you can get the thing out and enjoy running and driving the car, and you can get the fun for that, because that's just going to just jack you up and make sure you want to, and really makes you want to go in there and do these projects, and that'll make it go faster, but it also keeps it from becoming work. The second that this thing becomes work, out comes the tarp, and that's the end of your project there. So try to get some enjoyment in this thing. If you like driving the car, figure out how to get it running and driving as quickly as possible. Not finished running and driving, just get it somehow running and driving, even if you got to take it around the block or get it out there by hook or crook and take it out at night or some crazy thing like that. But have some fun. The quicker you have some fun and maximize your fun, the better chances are you're going to have a successful project, because that's what it's all about there. If it starts to become work, it's a goner, trust me. So maximize your fun. Get help if needed. So not all of us can do everything, right? So some things you might already plan. I'm going to do all this work, but then some stuff here I'm going to have to send out. But you may be thinking, yeah, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go out there and replace the floorboard, or I'm going to go out there and rebuild the engine. And when you get started on something like that, it's very easy to get overwhelmed once you get started on a thing. And then once you get overwhelmed, then it becomes frustrated. Then the project sits. When that happens there, anything like that happens, starts creeping into you like that, the chance of failure is growing substantially there. So if you get stuck on something, it's not a bad deal just to stop and bring in an expert and have them help you out. Maybe sit there, save up some money, have them put in that floorboard for you if you need to. Then you can get on, just get you over the hump, and now you're on to the next project, and your project keeps going. The fun, the excitement happens there. You don't want to get frustrated. So if you get stuck on something, bring someone in, get some help, farm it out, do whatever. The whole goal of this is to do the work ourselves, but you just can't do it all. You may find out you just ain't got the tools, you ain't got enough hands, whatever like that. It's okay to go out there and just get somebody to get you over the hump, then you can continue on your project. So give that some thought as well. Another thing here is to, when you're starting out, before you even buy something, either make or get a project book. So I got this project book here from Stacy David off of Gils. He does a lot of this stuff. This is a great book. But a project book here allows you to help define what your project, it gives you an area to write down, here's what my project's going to be, It helps you decide where these points are going to be. And then it gives you ideas. Here's all the stuff that's kind of associated with that. It allows you to go through and think about stuff. Well, what do I got to do here in this gap? What's this take me? You can go through this area, this area, this area, this area, and start writing down the cost to see, one, how much is it going to cost me? Can I afford this gap? And where's the sweet spot in the buy-in of this process? It also gives you an idea how much work I got to do like that. So the project book will help out with all that stuff. It also is something there that helps you out, especially if you got a lot of stuff you're building, 2 or 3 years from now, something breaks, you got to go to the parts store or something like that. You need to know what you put on there. The stuff isn't always all factory. It could be, upgraded parts from a different car or something else like that. You got to know all this stuff. You can't just go in there and say, oh, I got a 66 Mustang, I need some brakes for the darn thing, because who knows what brakes are on the thing anymore, right? So you want to write down all that stuff in your book, write down the part numbers, write down, if it's for a different make or model car or something like that, write all that stuff down so when the time comes, you'll know. The other thing about having it all written down, having it all in a nice book with your receipts and stuff like that, even pictures there, when there come times to sell something, Bill, to present this to a book to a buyer, it would be great. I've got one right now. I got a small folder of receipts that I've got for my car. There's only a few things in there. It's not a build book, but at least I had some receipts. It was very helpful. One thing I found out is I got a relatively new gas tank. So that's a huge step for me because I want to go fuel injection. I ain't got to worry about that. But I've got an upgraded power brake booster and master cylinder on mine, but there's no record of it in those receipts. And I cannot find a tag on it, a manufacturer on it. I've taken some pictures. Some people seem to think it's off a Ford Bronco, but that's going to be an issue if that thing goes bad because I don't know how it's going to replace it. I got the same thing with the radiator. They got a nice upgraded aluminum radiator. I don't know what brand it is. I don't know why none of this stuff is marked. I don't know if it's all Chinese stuff or what, but none of it's got a mark I can find on the darn thing there. So that's an issue. So writing all that stuff down in your build book is going to help you out. It's going to help the next person down the road. It's also going to add value to the car when the time comes to sell it. So in summary right here, I can't tell you, research. I've changed everything about my project that was in my head and what I want to do has changed completely from where I originally started. The more and more research I've done, the more and more reality sunk in, the more and more realistic I become, all these gaps and all that stuff completely changed. I ended up with a great project, but it's not what I started, and I've got different ending and starting points on this thing, and it's all in the research like there. Understand there again, be realistic on that end point, go out and look at that, be realistic on your buy point, understand that gap, that build gap. That's the killer of this whole thing. It's going to dictate the time, dictate the skills, dictate the tools. Don't underestimate that thing. And the problem is you're going to end up underestimating everything. You will underestimate the cost of this thing, the time, the skills, all that stuff. So leave some leeway on this stuff like there. The goal is to have fun. That's what this whole thing is. Make sure you figure out how to have fun. If it's not fun, there's no sense of doing this thing. That's the project of that. Make sure you have fun. Anything you can do to have fun quicker, to have more fun, do that. It helps for, like I said, just trying to get, if you just got an old something you pulled out of the woods, just get the thing running where you can sneak it around the block at night or something like that. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to get you jazzed to go in there and do something else, do that next project to get it a little bit better and a little bit better. Pretty soon there, you're going to be stoked, you're going to be having fun, and your project is going to come out and be successful. But again, I can't tell you how much it is, that research thing. Do not overlook it there. Just spend some time surfing out their projects. You will see one thing after another where it's very easy to tell someone got something and now they're selling it for some reason there. They didn't either, they didn't estimate that gap and how much time it was going to take, how much skills it was going to take, how much money. They, said, well, I don't want to, this is what I want for sure. I'm set on this, but I can't afford this. So I'm going to buy something back here and save money. Well, the cost from here to here actually tripled on their build price. They didn't take that into account. So really research it. Again, I can't focus on this gap. Your build gap here is going to be the killer. Get out there and have fun. Have some excitement. Get out there and enjoy it. That's what we're all doing this for. So a lot of stuff there. So I'm done rambling there. Hopefully some of this stuff will be helpful. If you've got additional tips, please post them in the comments down here. Again, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I like to do a lot of research. That's what I do for work. And so I do a lot of it here. Hopefully some of this will help you out. I see a lot of people, a lot of failure points, and have tried my best on my project there to make sure I don't do it. And I tell you, after all that research, again, I started over here, and I've done about 6 circles, and now I'm ended up, like right here. But that didn't happen. This wasn't an easy decision. There was a ton of work on these 2 little scratch marks I got here, and they're all changed, completely different from when I thought on it again there. So again, with that, hope this helps you. Again, leave your comments down here. If you got more tips and tricks, by all means, put them down here. A lot of this stuff there, I like to hear from real world folks. There's a lot of information out there from experts, which is really great. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. Trust me on that thing. But what I like doing these videos for is I'm not an expert, and likely you're not either. So the same crap I go through is the same crap you're going to go through, and that's what's important. I don't want to see somebody that's got all the tools and the money and the resources and the brand new parts given to them. That's not me. So that's not really relatable. And so you'll see a lot of my videos, if you're new to this thing here, it's going to be me out there struggling, cussing and swearing and throwing stuff, because that's exactly what you're going to do. But I get the job done. I'll show you how to get it done. Hopefully today I've given you some good insight on starting your project. Hope you get a project, and I hope it's successful for you. And again, leave your comments down there and take care. Bye.